We've given you our thoughts, but now it's your turn. Today we are coming to all of you to see how do we fix Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently on the channel, we've been talking a lot about the current state of Yu-Gi-Oh! So I thought I'd get together with our friend Johnny and we would go through some of your comments on how you think we can fix the current state of Yu-Gi-Oh! How are you doing, Johnny?
Doing good. Let's see if I'm doing this good after I've read some comments.
Quinster753 says, I wonder if limiting special summoning would make a decent format. Allowing only one special summon a turn would dramatically lower the power level, but without any other restrictions, control decks would probably have a field day, only having to stop 2 summons a turn. Reducing special summons might just be the most popular fix for Yu-Gi-Oh! That you will ever see online. And sadly, it just would not work at all for so many reasons.
Okay, so then we have a meta that's called Runic Stun Labyrinth Slew. Not sure if that's the most fun meta that you could think of.
Right.
The thing is, even if you then say, okay, what about 2? What about 3? You will have these decks that can live with 2 or 3, and they will still do their thing. And then you have those decks that just simply based on what they're doing. For example, a synchro deck.
Yeah.
A deck that wants to synchro summon cannot, everything that's considered synchro and XC would not be possible in the format that you proposed.
Yeah.
So then why don't we just go back to a time before synchro and XC? So we go back to GX. And if that's the type of gameplay that you want, that's good. That's what we have Time Wizard formats for.
Yeah, it slows the game down to a screeching halt in the worst kind of way. Like you say, it's just all gonna be Runic and Labyrinth and like Flaunderies, Eldritch, just like all these decks that people already kind of feel like are a little bit toxic. And honestly, the design of Yu-Gi-Oh! has gotten to this point because everything is built around making you feel like essentially the strongest TCG player in the world, where you're throwing 20 cards down and you're doing this crazy combo. And like, that's what the peak of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is meant to be from the ground up, right? Like, it's meant to have these crazy explosive turns that are back and forth and there's multiple triggers and combos going off. You take that out of the game and I feel like there's nothing even left to play the game for.
Yeah, it's more like we have all these TCGs and they're all really good for a different reason. A game like Hearthstone was so popular, it was because it had this random aspect of just generating random stuff and having these crazy moments. If you take that out of Hearthstone and if you remove all the discover, all of a sudden it becomes a much less interesting game because it loses that unique factor.
Yeah.
And I think with Yu-Gi-Oh! The thing for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is building that puzzle in your head and trying to figure things out and doing stuff like that and having to potentially count in so many interactions of your opponent. If you remove all of that and you go back to T-set pass, I think you can just play like any other TCG that's also a bit older, like a bit slower.
And yeah, I think that's the big thing for me is, you know, if you really want these things, they sort of already exist in the Time Wizard formats, like you said. Like, trying to limit something as crucial as a special summon in modern day advanced format, it's like the decks just aren't designed for it. Like, the cards have moved so far beyond the idea that you could ever only have one special summon a turn. I would challenge people with that opinion to maybe go back to Legend of Blue Eyes, play a game in LOB format and realize like normal summon, normal monster, play Fisher and Dark Hole, and it's not quite as exciting as you might think. We have the one and only Golden Boy on our How to Start Playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Video says, I just find it hilarious that even people that like Yu-Gi-Oh! Will say not to bother picking up the game. I agree with the sentiment too, and if that's not an indication of the franchise as a whole, I don't know what else it could be. So we got a lot of comments on our How to Start Playing video that were quite literally people just saying the best thing to do is just not play it at all. And that's like, as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan, that's very disheartening for me to see that our own community is trying to stop people from entering it. What do you think about that?
I think there's a large portion of the community that's not active players anymore. That is previous players that have at some point decided X deck or X card is either too egregious, too expensive, too fast, something like that, and they just don't like the game anymore. I think that's a sentiment a lot of people have, that they just want to go back to the slower time. And I think those are the ones that say don't pick up the game. And then you have no idea how the combos work.
Yeah.
Nothing explains to you that you should go into this card first, search this card, then special summon this card. And I think that could be the reason why people say don't pick up Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the barrier of entry is very high. If they have no idea what's Yu-Gi-Oh! And you're like, by the way, when you synchro summon this monster, you have to chainlink one this and then chainlink to this, because if not, then Ash Blossom really, really messes up your turn. And you're like, what is a synchro summon?
It's just too much. It's too much right away, right? I do agree with what you said too about there is a section of the community who really doesn't play the modern game anymore, but still engages with Yu-Gi-Oh! In some way, whether that's, you know, they play Edison or Goat or something like that. Maybe they just play at the kitchen table with their friends every now and then. And that's fine. Like, everyone can enjoy the game however they want to enjoy it. And I'm not saying everyone needs to play modern advanced format 2024 Yu-Gi-Oh! In order to be like a real Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. Like, doesn't matter at all. Just enjoy the game how you want. But I think discouraging people from even investigating what the game is and trying to find out which aspect of it they can find to enjoy, it's just sad. Like, the more people who play Yu-Gi-Oh! I think the better, because the game is very different depending on how you choose to play it, but each way you play the game has its own fun associated with it.
We already have an issue with getting new players in, so the people that are actually enjoying the game should try to focus on that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. If Konami isn't going to do a lot of like onboarding sort of new player products, then we as players should be able to take on that onus and say, okay, Konami's not doing any favors to get people into this game, so why don't I try my best to teach someone the rules, or, you know, show someone Goat format and see if they enjoy it, and then maybe we can move on to Edison, and maybe if they like that, we'll just keep going and they'll play in advanced in no time, right? Like,
we have that in our locals. Like, the locals that I go to is very not competitive. Every once in a while we have a new player, and the store owner is just like, hey, we have our locals today, we are X amount of players, but one of them is completely new. You're going to be playing against him, please, like, try to explain cards, like, hey, tell him like why evenly matched can be activated here and things like that. And we had a few people that like came in, had no idea what to do, and over weeks they got better because everybody was nice to them. There I can really see that people are very open to learning, but often there's just no place for them to do so. So if you're going to locals and like you have someone that comes in that's new, just like, be nice to them, like help them out. And I think if you do that, sadly Konami doesn't do much for that, but like if you do that as in your community, it will help that community a lot.
absolutely. Next up is Nazmagani9124, who says, for me, the biggest problem in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to transition from one deck to another requires significant amounts to understand a new deck, compared to Hearthstone, where I can mess around and get the idea of it within 2 to 3 games. I think this is a double-edged sword of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where if you learn Yu-Gi-Oh! By playing one deck, you're not really learning the whole of Yu-Gi-Oh! You're learning one deck, because every deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Does play so differently from each other with like different mechanics and like ways to summon your cards and what your main game plan is varies so much from deck to deck that honestly this comment is pretty on point, that it's like if you play one deck for long enough, you're gonna feel like you don't know how to play anything else, basically.
All of those mana-based games, like a lot of the times your hand also plays itself. Like, do you have a 1-drop? Yes, well, play it. Do you have a 2-drop? Yes, well, play it. With Yu-Gi-Oh!, not only does one of your card have more text than all of your Hearthstone cards of a whole deck combined, but also you have to think about what your opponent does. You play a card, it does something, but then if it goes to the graveyard, it does something else. And if it gets banished from the graveyard, it can do something else. So like there's so many more factors in there that definitely make this game much harder to swap around. But I feel once you've played your synchro deck, and once you've played your control deck, and once you've played your link spam deck and your pendulum deck, if you really want to go through that, once you have that level of understanding, it gets easier to swap around from decks. But every time I pick up a new deck, it's still just like reading in, looking at some combos.
I know this from being on the Magic channel, like you were saying, just curving out your hand and just like, I have a 1-drop, so I'll play that turn 1 and I'll play my 2-drop turn 2. I get handed a Magic deck and I don't need to look through the deck and read every single card to know what I need to do. I can just draw a hand and start playing stuff and the game plan will sort of fall into place. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you very much have to go, okay, this is my starter, and when I play it, I need to search this specific card instead of these 8 other ones that I could search for, but those do nothing, so I need this specific one, and then that card gets me this, and blah, 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 and on it goes. All these different mechanics are like attached to these archetypes in a way that it's like you're playing a different game every time you pick up a new deck. I liken Yu-Gi-Oh almost to like a MOBA, like League of Legends or something, where it's like, depending on what character you pick, you're playing a completely different game than if you picked a different character.
Definitely. Also, the fact that most decks somehow break one of the base rules of the game, like Plunder Patrol, you synchro summon, but you don't really synchro summon, and you XC summon, but you don't really XC summon.
Yeah.
And then you go to Centurion, and all of a sudden your monsters are spells, and then like you go to Runic, and all of a sudden you can fusion summon a monster without material by just using the spell, and like every deck somehow nowadays doesn't do Yu-Gi-Oh properly. They kind of like go around it. I think that might also make it much harder to learn it, because then all of a sudden you have to unlearn the fact that you could do that in the other deck, and here you have to do it properly, but you can cheat another thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It definitely is pretty intimidating to like change decks, but the internet's your best friend. Watch a deck combo guide before you try to pick it up and see if it's even your thing in the first place, because yeah, I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. Aeon Blue says, the idea that someone getting upset their pet deck doesn't get to play in a different format is backwards for me. This dude doesn't want to play in our cheap format where you can't cast more than 5 spells each turn because his deck combos off with 6 spells. Tough luck, I guess keep playing regular Yu-Gi-Oh! We're gonna go sit at this table and have fun. If you're too scared of alienating enfranchised players by getting on a different boat, you'll just go down with them in the sinking ship. So this was in response to something we said in our format discussion video, which is basically just that the Yu-Gi-Oh community is trying to come up with alternative formats, but the community is just sort of subdividing itself to the point where no one alternative format is rising to the top as a good way for everybody to play it, essentially.
I do understand the point of like, hey, if this person only wants to play that one deck and this new format doesn't accommodate for that, well, tough luck for you. But that's what Yu-Gi-Oh also is about, being able to just play some random stuff and having fun with it. As with the example of Sky Striker, a deck that everybody believed to be dead, we just saw it play second at a YCS thanks to Ryan Yu. These things are what makes the whole eternal format of Yu-Gi-Oh so great, is that you have decks that people don't consider playable anymore, and somehow someone like finds that one idea that makes it playable and comes back to it. And if you immediately take out all of these options by just limiting your format in a certain way, then I think Yu-Gi-Oh loses a lot of its charm of that like 22 years of like pool of cards that we can draw from.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we were saying too about like every deck plays so unique. So when you find a deck that you enjoy playing so much, it can feel really hard to get off of it, because it's that exact unique style that you connect with. Yeah. And like you say with Ryan Yu, if he didn't have a burning love for Sky Striker, it never would have placed second at a YCS, right? So I think the moral is, if you're trying to create a new format, you're much better off being as inclusive as you can, as opposed to trying to like limit people and tell them, you know, what they can't play. You should be more focused on creating a rule set that is exciting and cool enough, and saying, okay, this is what you can play. This is what you can do. Instead of just saying that deck you love is not allowed. Say, well, actually you can play a better version of that deck for this reason and that reason.
Yeah, I would love more alternative formats for Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm pretty sure we will find some in the future. But for now, I would rather say try to find a format that as many of the decks that people love nowadays are still playable in. And that does include leaving special summons untouched and stuff like that.
It's funny because I do think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is at a better point than it's ever been in terms of alternative formats. Like, we are getting this sort of like soft Time Wizard support. And yeah, people are just being more creative online, coming up with stuff, which is awesome to see. I think that's the key. If you're out there and you want to make a fun format for you and your friends, I would recommend doing it in a way that doesn't limit the options people have, but instead expands them in a fun and new way.
Yeah.
Lee May 3097 says, keeping up with the meta, OCG trends, looking ahead of the curve for new decks, staple cards, plus checking up prices and local stores can be quite time consuming. All just to play 2 tournaments on the weekend right after my weekly 40 hours of work. Each tournament taking 4 to 6 hours and 80 minutes traveling back and forth. And that's not including how much money I spent on my 3 decks, staple cards, tech cards, sealed product, structure decks, accessories, tournament fees, and my time.
First of all, I always think it's weird that people complain that a hobby costs money. Like, try out playing golf, like, and you'll see what costs money. Try having a horse, like, or being a car guy. Like, things cost money. I do understand that, like, for example, right now, Fuvolos being so expensive that if you're, especially like a young person that only has like their allowance and they want to play, that is really frustrating. But a hobby costs money and a hobby takes time. Getting good at anything takes time. Like, if Yu-Gi-Oh! Was solved after 2 days of doing something, it wouldn't be fun. There's definitely improvement on the side of Konami that can be done, but I don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Being difficult and taking time is a bad thing.
Yeah, this is one I mostly wanted to highlight just because it feels like this is a common sentiment through the community in a lot of places, and a lot of TCGs have this problem where people feel like it takes too much time, or it is too expensive, or like they can't afford the best deck, so it's not fair. And I'm tempted to agree that it's a hobby. You're choosing to spend your money on it. You're choosing to spend your time on it. If you're not enjoying yourself, you don't have to keep doing it. Like, I think that's the important thing here is like, yes, it can be frustrating that you're not enjoying the game as much as you used to, but you also don't need to go out and spend $1,200 to get the #1 most competitive deck. And yes, people are going to drop mulch armies on you and it's going to be annoying, but at the end of the day, that's a decision you're choosing to make, right? And I think it's totally reasonable to play Yu-Gi-Oh! At a budgeted level that you are comfortable with. I really don't think you need to go out and spend your rent payment in order to play this game.
Definitely.
Nor should you, in fact.
Also, there are, like right now in the meta, there are lots of decks that you can play for, let's just say, not very little money, but if you want to compete, the deck that I'm playing right now is Runic White Forest. If you take out the Fuvolos and the Perulias that are in the side deck, the deck is not expensive. You play 2 LZs, the whole White Forest suit aside of that costs you $15. And then the Runics are all cheap. Labyrinth, for example, is a really competent deck, especially now with Fuvolos around. If you don't have a Fuvolos and you want to play something that's good against it, pick up Labyrinth. Labyrinth is really good in this meta.
Into Tenpai as well.
Yeah, into Tenpai as well. There's so many things that you can do with little money in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now that are good. Funny thing is, our last argument was, what if the meta is just Labyrinth, Flunder, and Runic? And now I mentioned those 3 decks being cheap.
Like advocating people play stun, it's cheap. But like, honestly...
Not stun, but there's lots of options that you can do to do well at locals.
I guess that's an easy recommendation to make for people because it's like, these decks are cheaper than like top tier combo decks. And also, if you're one of those players who's like, I hate all these combo special summon spam, like meta decks, they're ruining the game. You can also play things like Labyrinth and Runic and just like play the anti-meta game a little bit and really stick it to all those special summoners out there. Those dirty, dirty special summoners, you know what I mean? So
what I'm not trying to say with this is that people that don't have money shouldn't be able to play Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yes.
Definitely should. And I think something that the OCG does with reprinting or printing cards at different rarities, that new set comes out and there's an SP in there and it exists as a super rare that costs you maybe like $7. And then if you want to be the bling bling guy that has the cool cards and wants to have this way of like showing off how great they are, then you can get the quarter century for a few $100. And there will be differences in like how valuable they are after a few years after the card got reprinted, because the high rare won't get reprinted. I think that is much better than what we do is like right now with people not being able to properly play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Because if you don't have a Fuvolos, well, your deck is just worse.
Yeah.
And so I would prefer if that was changed in a way that people are enabled to play at least the staples at a low rarity so that they can compete, and I don't know, the price point of expensive card is just a rarity.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We say all this about, it's a hobby, it's going to be expensive. We also don't think that any single Yu-Gi-Oh card needs to cost 130 euro. If we could have OCG multiple rarities, that would be the best of both worlds. But at the end of the day, if you're choosing to play this game, you do need to know that these things exist and they are unavoidable. So play within whatever budget you can and still enjoy the game without completely breaking the bank.
And if keeping up, especially with the price trends of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a bit too difficult for you, realizing, oh, I had this deck and now the card that I bought a few months ago for 30 euro each, now they're really dirt cheap. It does take a bit in like keeping up with which cards are getting reprinted, but you can just follow our Instagram and there you have lots of information on all of that.
Love that plug.
Oh, amazing plug.
That's it for our video today. If you enjoyed it, you want to see more like it, let us know in the comments down below. Remember to like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you out there on the duel tables, am I right?
Not with Runic Stun.
Not with Runic Stun. We take back what we said.
What League of Legends character would the Runic Stun deck be?
I don't know, Tom Kench or something.
I thought of Tom Kench. I was thinking, what is this
just
really annoying?
Yeah, no matter how much you attack him, he just doesn't die.